Hi, I'm Carolee Rigsbee, and I teach strategic management at the University of Illinois at Springfield. In my classes and in my research, I emphasize the need for business to be socially and environmentally responsible. Right now, I'm working on understanding how organizations can be better designed and governed to support social and environmental goals.
I'm Celeste Hammond, and I teach law from a transactional perspective rather than from a dispute resolution or litigation perspective that has been the traditional approach in legal education since Harvard decided to use appellate decisions as an inexpensive course materials. But that was 150 years ago. My courses in real estate law and climate change emphasize the goal of understanding client business motives and collaborating with the clients and other players in the deal to achieve their business goals.
My name is Sara Davila-Ruhaak, and I'm the director of the International Human Rights Clinic. I'm also an assistant professor of law here at UIC Law, and I teach human rights and supervise students in human rights cases where they learn how to engage in lawyering and advocacy domestically and internationally.
First of all, Carolee and I are going to work together and share what our research is. We're going to discuss our research on benefit corporation awareness. And then Sara will tell us about her scholarship. And then finally, we'll answer any questions you pose for us.
So we care about climate change and sustainability and believe that business has a major role to play in climate change mitigation and adaptation, and in broader forms of social and environmental responsibility. And I want to show you a couple of slides to show we're not alone. First, according to a large-scale survey by Morning Group, it seems, as this chart that they've produced shows, that many Americans agree. And so do many of the CEOs of top US businesses. The US Business Roundtable, whose members are the leaders of US companies with a collective 15 million employees, and the equivalent of the 27% of the US stock market capitalization, not only stated last summer that it was time to move beyond stockholder primacy to more broadly address stakeholder needs, but just last month issued a report titled Addressing Climate Change, Principles and Policies on how to tackle climate change with market-based solutions and policies that drive innovation and cost-effective solutions to protecting the environment, business, and society. They say it's time for a new approach.
Today, we're going to talk with you about research Carolee, Lee, and I and other researchers conducted on the awareness of public benefit corporations, which are a new form of incorporation in Illinois and many other states that are intended to help profit-seeking businesses that put social and environmental goals, such as those related to climate change mitigation and adaptation, at the forefront of their business model. While we think the outcomes of the study are very interesting, we also think that how the study came about and how it was conducted speaks to creating, conducting, and reporting research that cuts through interdisciplinary silos to support sustainability.
But before we get to that story, we should probably explain what a benefit corporation is, so that those who may not have heard of it before, because many may not have heard of it before. So I'm going to put up another slide. Okay, the benefit corporation is a new for-profit structure for business entities that came out of the social enterprise movement. It's neither a for-profit corporation nor a not-for-profit. The benefit corporation form was introduced to fill a void, a weakness in the incorporation options available for those wanting to ensure that their for-profit company would be legally supported while it makes a positive and significant impact on society, including the natural environment. Historically, case law in the United States has required shareholder wealth maximization over claims to protecting broader stakeholder interests. As such, benefit corporations are designed to provide more protection for-profit organizations dedicated to creating public benefit, and for their directors in protecting this mission. Maryland was the first state to introduce benefit corporation legislation in 2010. Illinois followed in 2013. This registration option is now available in at least 36 states, though there are some variations in the legal frameworks being used. For example, Delaware approved a model designed to be more attractive for those who want to raise significant capital, perhaps in publicly traded markets. Delaware's model is called the Public Benefit Corporation, although other models also support public offering. According to one study by Ellen Berry, there are at least 7,700 benefit corporations in the US. And B-Lab, an organization promoting B Corp certification and the formation of benefit corporations, lists about 46 in Illinois. They include businesses with architects, ESG investment advisors, food service consultants, lawyers, logistics providers, digital marketing experts, to name a few.
I want to examine the Illinois version of a benefit corporation statute. So let's look at another slide. While there are some state-by-state differences in benefit corporation statutes, the Illinois statute defines the specific public benefit that must be created as one or more of those you see on the slide. Specifically, Section 3, preserving the environment, and number 4, improving public health, or the more general broad one of accomplishment of any other particular benefit for society or the environment. There are several other features of the Illinois Benefit Corporation statute that explain how these companies are held to their mission. For example, there is relatively increased protection of the social purpose in the case of a merger and acquisition. In addition, the directors are required to consider the effects of organization activities on its stakeholders, and that includes employees, suppliers, customers, community, and the environment from both a short and long-term perspective. But there's no requirement to give shareholders or any other group priority in doing so. In other words, profit need not be the only goal of this type of for-profit entity. And many states like Illinois adopted recommendations for the model benefit corporation law that requires auditing to a third-party standard, plus annual publication of a report on activities related to mission support with specific content requirements. This can be contrasted with corporate social responsibility reporting that's limited to topics a company's decision makers decide to highlight.
So how does a business school professor at UIS and a law school professor who's at a completely different institution end up working together on benefit corporation research? There's a story here that not only explains how we ended up working together, but the specific study that we conducted.
Yes, it's quite a story. I was looking at how for-profit businesses can advance sustainability and resilience in the face of climate change. I'm convinced that government and legal changes alone are not enough to respond to the threats of climate change. My message has been law is not enough to mitigate the threats, that business has to see sustainability as part of their business goals if society will be able to avoid the damages. Here's another slide. Yeah, through our work in the Center for Urban Resilience and Environmental Sustainability, known as CURES, which, as you know from Dr. Wooble's keynote this morning, is where Carolee has been a leading finance and business subcommittee chair. I became aware of benefit corporations as an alternative form of a for-profit business entity that would support business commitments to sustainability and responsiveness to climate change.
And I started studying benefit corporations with Stephanie Black, who's at Texas A&M San Antonio, and Glenn Cassidy, a public policy expert and economist. We've been trying to understand the challenges that owners of benefit corporations might face as their organizations grow and gain market recognition, especially in terms of control of their mission. After pouring through statutes and reading over takeover provisions and reading about that for not-for-profits and corporations, we built a model around what we thought would be real or perceived barriers to a benefit corporation going public. I was at a conference, though, when I met an entrepreneur who had set up a very successful social business venture, but who had never heard of a benefit corporation. And that's when I had a big aha. Wouldn't that be the biggest barrier of all? I was thinking about perceived acquisition concerns as a barrier. Maybe the biggest barrier is simply awareness. So I asked an accounting colleague at UIS, Carol Jessup, who had a similar reaction. This was happening around the time of the Cures Connection workshop.
Yes, and Carolee brought it up with me in our discussions at that workshop and in subsequent meetings. I also thought benefit corporation awareness might be an issue. I quietly, informally polled my colleagues, both practicing lawyers dealing with commercial transactions and law professors. And this unscientific effort showed that most hadn't heard about benefit corporations. Yet, if this form of entity is to play the role its creators intended at the B Lab, that awareness is critical. And so I was invited to join a research project on awareness of benefit corporations with Carolee and her colleagues, Carol Jessup and Stephanie Black and Julia Wassick, a student at UIS. This was new to me, this cross-discipline collaboration as distinct from silos. My research mainly reflects the transactional approach to lawyering. Learn about the client's goals and help your client achieve those goals in the context of legal rules. My own law review articles and books on commercial leasing and commercial financing of real estate transactions always comes at the law with this in mind. The academic conferences that the Center for the Real Estate Law has held since 1993 always include non-attorneys as speakers and authors in the symposium issue of the John Marshall Law Review. Most recently, we have embraced scientists in a new focus on sustainability. Don Woobles has been a prominent participation. So in our preparing our lawyer students for the practice of real estate law, including those who earn our certificate in sustainability, we are aware of the business clients and all their other professional advisors. I began to see the awareness of transactional attorneys advising their clients and helping them to set up a BC entity as very important to increasing the BC role in responding to climate change. So we decided we would survey the professionals who advise clients who start up companies to see, among other things, if and what they knew about benefit corporations. And we also wanted to know if the educators who are preparing those professionals know about and are teaching about benefit corporations. You know, legal research mostly looks at how the law, legislation, and court rules define the rules applicable to transactions, how to do it. But Carolee was developing a survey of professionals. Such empirical research is relatively new to legal scholarship. But I had developed a survey, administered it, and reported on it several years ago when I knew that I wondered what transactional attorneys knew about binding arbitration as an alternative dispute resolution method, kind of an alternative to litigation. So I mailed a 20-page questionnaire to nearly 300 attorneys who were members of the Chicago Bar Association to learn how much they knew. And actually, that survey was one about awareness, wasn't it, Carolee?
It was. So we conducted the study, and let me put up a slide to summarize. Here, okay. We sent a survey to over 7,200 accounting and law professionals, practitioners, and educators. And we used a combination of recruitment approaches since there was no single easy way to reach the intended respondent groups. So we sent the survey to members of 3 relevant sections of the Illinois State Bar Association, to law professors teaching courses related to the transactional perspective on business entities, to accounting professors, and to CPAs. We had a better response rate for the CPAs who we reached through the snowball method of recruitment, and for the direct mail to teachers, about 12.8% and 6.9% respectively. But the response rate from practicing lawyers was quite low. In the end, though, we had a good enough sample size, 68, to draw some conclusions. First, we found that over 75% of the respondents knew little or nothing about benefit corporations. Even with few lawyers responding, though, we were still able to statistically conclude that the lawyers who did respond tended to know a little bit more about benefit corporations than the accountants that responded.
Yeah, in hindsight, there were problems with limiting our survey to Illinois attorneys in a single bar association and to Illinois law professors. Yet there were institutional limits to developing a broader survey list. The Association of American Law Schools is the trade association for law professors. It would not share its directory of law professors in an online format to help me to develop an email list. And during the December 2019 to mid-January 2020 winter break, I was not able to share the paper directory with students who had already left our campus. And that became even worse as the spring 2020 semester went into lockdown. It was hard to get email addresses for those professors. Thus, using a broader national group of law professors for the survey was not really possible. And if we attempted to survey attorneys across the country, how would we focus? Members of the American Bar Association, local bar associations, or specialty bar associations, such as the American College of Real Estate Lawyers, of which I'm a member. Deciding who would get the survey and how we would get their email addresses would be a time-consuming and maybe an expensive challenge to our research here. But this finding that the professionals who advise clients on how to start up their organizations and those who teach those professionals are likely not to be aware of benefit corporations seems to be the most important conclusion from our research.
Yes, it is. And in most states, we now have the option available to operate businesses with a hybrid purpose, for profit and with a social mission, and be legally protected in so doing. It seems to me it's an important option that is available to support a number of profitable social ventures, and it's utilitarian in supporting communities that are turning to companies to deal with growing needs for infrastructure, energy, water, and other upgrades. Interestingly, it's even been suggested that benefit corporations could be used to reduce drug prices. I can see so many uses, but more folks need to know about this option. And the benefit corporation statutes may need to be improved as more use leads to more feedback on their effectiveness.
Yeah, I agree. If the benefit corporation is to meet its mission, especially to advance sustainability, lawyers must be familiar with this legal entity. Those attorneys will be able to make a difference in their work advising clients who decide to incorporate and reduce the impact of climate change as part of their corporate mission. These transactional lawyers will add value by their counsel.
So those were really interesting lessons. And we learned some other things in this study, and we're working on a publication to share the broader findings. Also, though, looking back at the project, the study was definitely an eye-opener for me in more ways than the results, which gets us to the topic of bridging disciplinary silos. We also learned a lot about doing interdisciplinary research, and we have some advice to share.
We certainly did. For one, scholars in different fields use different research tools. For example, empirical research is relatively new to legal scholarship. I didn't have the required CIT training and certifications. It helped having someone experienced in research involving surveys of human beings and how to complete all the regulatory formalities. Carolee made me very familiar with the bureaucracy that controls CIT certifications so that I could join the research team in a timely fashion. My earlier empirical research about binding arbitration didn't require any such approvals. I just mailed out the survey and hand recorded the results.
Yeah, and then we had discussions on where to present and where to publish. Do we publish in an accounting, law, or management journal? Do we present, which disciplines, journal, conferences do we present at?
Yeah, that still continues as a challenge from what I understand. In legal scholarship, publication in a top 10 law review, Harvard, Yale, the University of Chicago, is much more important for the researcher than publication in a specialty law journal of the sort that will find this BC research valuable. In legal scholarship, works by more than one author are discouraged and not valued. That has implication for annual credit to the dean for a scholarship, let alone the implications for those who are seeking tenure. Because I'm tenured, a full professor, and with other publications in law reviews, I'm not that worried about engaging in interdisciplinary scholarship and where it will be published.
And there's one other factor I've experienced more broadly, not just on this project, but on other interdisciplinary disciplinary projects. And it's that in my field, management, it tends not to be a design science, whereas many other disciplines are. We tend to evaluate what has been done and then make recommendations on best practices based on high performance. Yet if we're going to respond effectively to the climate crisis and other social issues, we need innovation in how we organize and manage different stakeholders to address climate change and sustainability issues, not just innovation in technology. But moving to a design science brings a whole additional set of practical research challenges, like managing intellectual property and in new organization design efforts. And we could really learn a lot from engineering and the sciences as we move forward in these areas. So, and then the traditional legal research.
Well, I think the benefits, as we've discussed them, Carolee, the benefits having worked together really outweigh the challenges, wouldn't you say?
They do, and my colleagues and I had presentation and publication opportunities in venues we would not normally have had access to, and now we have a better understanding of benefit corporations. Our colleague Carol brought an accounting lens, Celeste brought a legal transactional perspective and resources. But really, I think in the end, I found this and in the other interdisciplinary projects I'm working on, that networking with folks who share the same end goal. Like our case, it was seeing the need to deal with climate change and ensure sustainable development. That it really made it easier to work together and get through any differences.
Yeah, I think that we came at it from different angles, but now I am excited because we both can see some new research ideas. First, for me, why was this benefit legislation not developed as a uniform act, like the ubiquitous Uniform Commercial Code? And secondly, is the benefit corporation a better entity than nonprofit corporations to achieve sustainability goals? Which is more motivating, fundraising or profit making?
And I'd like to look into the different ways that benefit corporations can be used as a tool in public policy aimed at addressing climate change and other social issues.
We'll see. Now I'm going to ask my colleague, Sarah Davila-Ruhaak, to tell us about her research to recognize and emphasize the right to a healthy environment. We're really excited to learn about your accomplishments, Sarah.
Thank you both. It was really wonderful to see how you guys came together in your research and complemented each other in trying to figure out how your fields could connect. And I think that's really exciting about interdisciplinary work coming from different angles and seeing how our work can complement each other. So now I'm gonna share my, my human rights work, my scholarship. I tend to, let's see. Okay, so everybody can see my presentation. Wonderful. So as I mentioned, I am the director of the International Human Rights Clinic. I also teach international human rights law. I'm also the faculty advisor, or one of the faculty advisors for the International Human Rights Law concentration that we have at the law school. And I have been working on sort of general human rights practice from a domestic point of view and international. So let's see. So how I arrived at this work is, sort of sometimes how human rights work sort of comes to your door and you find opportunities. I am part of several human rights coalitions and task force, and one of them is the National Coalition on Human Rights to Water and Sanitation. It's a collective of advocates, of lawyers, professors who work together to advocate on the human right to water locally. And they use the human rights framework to advocate for better protections. So somebody in another institution sort of reached out to me, and they know that I am originally from Puerto Rico. And they said that they had met this Puerto Rican environmental justice lawyer who sort of had made a presentation to the coalition, and maybe she would be interested in talking about her work and my work. And so we connected, and she talked about the work, the extensive work that environmental justice advocates, lawyers, organizers had done in Puerto Rico and the southern region of Puerto Rico to seek to stop a corporation from polluting their communities through the mismanagement and dumping of coal ash. So what you see in that slide is a mountain of coal ash. It's the byproduct after coal has been burned. It is uncovered. And so it goes into the air and it pollutes all the surrounding communities. Additionally, originally, this company was trying to dump this matter into facilities with uncovered trucks, and so all of the towns that were exposed to it were polluted, and so there was this very strong coming together from all different communities that were affected in trying to stop this company from polluting sort of the environment. What I think is key is the connection between environmental harm and climate change and human rights and people being able to enjoy their human rights. And so in this case, people were suffering from high incidence of cancer, miscarriages, birth defects, developmental delays, and many other conditions that were really due to the toxic chemicals in these ashes. And not only in the air, but then the air would flow into the water that would be then used for agriculture, for drinking. And then a couple of years ago, this company tried to create this sort of secondary use product called Agremax, and basically to use it for construction. So not only now was it in the air and the water, but it was being used for construction. And so people had it in their homes, in the sidewalks. And so it was really, it was terrible. And it sort of, the communities continued to advocate against it. And so when I talked to this lawyer, she said, we have been doing this vigorous organizing, lawyering, advocated against it, but we're thinking about using a human rights framework, an international human rights framework. And so we talked, and it really was great to see how we could come together, right? How to bring a local issue into the international arena, how to infuse international law into the local work, which is a lot of what we do in the International Human Rights Clinic. It's bridging the gap between the local, the domestic, and international human rights law. And so I have here a couple of definitions because I think that to talk about human rights and the right to a healthy environment, we have to have sort of a common language about what is this framework that we're talking about. And so human rights protect the rights of all persons. It doesn't matter their status, their race, ethnicity, language, religion. A government, a state, owes this duty to all the persons in their territory. And in other territories, if its actions affected, right? And that's sort of extraterritorial activities. And so international human rights law imposes this duty on states to protect all persons and to protect all these human rights. And it does so through the doctrine of state responsibility. And this doctrine says that a state is responsible for the acts of its agents if they engage in violating human rights, but also it is responsible when private entities, non-state actors engage in human rights violations, and it knows or it should know of these actions. And what I think is interesting in this discussion today is that human rights hold state responsible for the wrongdoings of corporations. And so I think that this is one of the bridges when we can talk about business models and human rights, the public and the private sector, and how we can come together to hold corporations responsible and to pressure governments to hold corporations responsible. So the right to a healthy environment has been emerging sort of in the last decade or two under international human rights law. It has been recognized in around the world in constitutions. It has been recognized in regional human rights systems, but it has not risen to the level of an express recognized right under the United Nations. But I think that that is something that we're seeing. We're seeing the development of this new right of recognition. I think that we can't talk about environmental justice and sort of fighting against climate change if we don't think about this right to a healthy environment. So the right to a healthy environment basically protects all people and the environment to make sure that the environment is safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable. And not only that, but the environmental conditions are such that other human rights don't get affected or violated. And this relationship between the environment and a variety of human rights, and I included it in the slide, some of them, is because human rights are considered to be interdependent, interconnected. And so we see this fusion. A violation of one right can result in a violation of another. Something else that I think is critical in using the human rights framework is that the right to a healthy environment recognizes that individuals and communities are right holders when we're talking about environmental degradation and climate change. And so it's not only sort of asking that corporations do their part, but it's holding countries, states responsible for violating their environmental human rights. And so I think that is one of the most important sort of features of using a human rights framework. One, that they're right holders, right? And two, that non-state actors such as private corporations can be held responsible through the state, or that the state can be held responsible for the acts of the corporation. Okay, so what have I done in the classroom? So the Human Rights Clinic took on the project of working with, in collaboration with activists in Puerto Rico, and we made a submission to the United Nations Human Rights Committee in relation to the list of issues of the United States concerning the unsafe dumping and mismanagement of coal ash. So basically, we made a submission saying and arguing that it was a violation of human rights and that the United States government was responsible. And that is because, number one, the United States is a state party to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And number two, because Puerto Rico as a US territory, it doesn't have the recognition as a state. And so we use the United States as the state that we hold responsible. So student clinicians worked for a couple of years on doing fact finding, on drafting legal documents and sort of drafting a report that we submitted to the United Nations. And additionally, I taught last year an environmental human rights course where we examined the right to a healthy environment from different perspectives. And so I think that was really exciting for students. When I always ask on the first day of class for students to come up with what are the most pressing human rights sort of your time or now. And when I went to law school, it was the freedom from torture, right? Or more civil and political rights. And what has been interesting is that this new generation of law students are thinking about the environment and the role that it has in their lives. And so many of them said environmental human rights or environmental justice. And so right there, it was so eye-opening in terms of where we're going with our work and how we are moving forward, even though it doesn't always seem that way. And so I was very encouraged about sort of continuing this work and for law students to be alongside with us, right, in that process. I also published an article that just came out on this topic of the right to a healthy environment for the communities in the southern region of Puerto Rico in terms of coal ash. And my scholarship on environmental human rights focuses on how to use a human rights framework to protect vulnerable populations in the face of environmental harm and climate change. I'm working on another article right now, or the research part, on the Inter-American human rights system, that is the regional system of the Americas, and how we can use the right to a healthy environment under that system to protect vulnerable populations. And I will actually, after my presentation, I will put the links to the reports and the papers so that people can see them. Okay, so what challenges do I foresee and have faced in this work? Well, human rights work has a lot of challenges. And I think that the words of Kumi Naidoo, South African environmental human rights champion who was former head of Greenpeace and Amnesty International, said, and it really, I took it to heart, is that we have to fail a lot in bringing cases. We have to fail in trying different strategies. And it's in that process of failing that we will succeed, right? And so I think it speaks to me because we have to be creative in how we engage in this work. Human rights work tends to be very creative, right? We try to, if we see that something is not working, that we need to find other mechanisms or make other arguments. And so I think in this fight of protecting the environment and against climate change, we have to be creative. And so I think that we have to think about different models. We have to think about different advocacy strategies. We have to think about working together, right? To think about ways that we can do this work. And so on the slide, you will also see it's the Juliana versus United States was a case that was brought by children trying to hold the government responsible for their environmental human rights. I think it's so important that we're thinking about how are we not only protecting from past injuries, right, which is always what we think in the law, but also what about the future, right? There will be a different future for our children, for future generations, if we're not thinking about what we're going to do now to protect against climate change. So finally, I thought that this was a good bridge in our presentations These are the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And while this is not a treaty that is binding, it is a framework of principles that corporations should be using and that states should be encouraging to be thinking about how their work impacts human rights, right? And what are the specific duties that they have in order to protect populations that get affected by their activities. And I will also include the link for that because I think it's a great tool that we can promote. And so if I can say something, I think that when we're thinking about the protection against environmental harm and climate change is that we all have to come together from different disciplines, the public and the private. And as Celeste and Carolee, you guys have done sort of interdisciplinary work and thinking about complementing each other, our work. So I see that we have different questions in the Q&A function. I'm going to answer a question that was posed. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna ask
Sure.
ask a question. The first one that I saw was from Ari Tolman, who's a new researcher in law and sociology. She's getting a joint degree in law and sociology, PhD from Northwestern, and she's with the ABA Foundation and actually was working with Ellen Berry on her article. And it's really a question for Carolee in terms of research. And she wonders whether we would be distributing the survey to other disciplines, other professional disciplines. Carolee, did you think about that? You're muted.
I do think it's worthwhile to do that. I think we have a pretty quick pulse with our initial study in terms of what we would potentially expect. I can say that, you know, in terms of reaching out to MBA students, I think that's an excellent suggestion. I think another thing that couples with that is looking at, you know, even the textbook materials, the educational materials that we're using in classes, to look at those and see what the content is there. I recently, a new textbook that I have adopted in organization theory actually has a chapter now on hybrid organizations. And so I think we're on the cusp of getting the word out. So I think I would want to hold back, maybe you know, look at, you know, come at it from different angles, but I think it's definitely, oh, sorry about the background there, but I think it's definitely something that will change quickly as the topic becomes more, people become more aware. So yeah, so I'm thinking that, let me try, I was trying to, okay, adjust my screen, but I'm going to give up on that. So
well, and I think Warren Levy, who's an attorney who's doing clinical work at UIUC, has been really good in the law field of actually developing little kits that law professors can use in their courses to talk about climate change in an appropriate way. And he was on the panel this morning. So yeah, I mean, I think that's very important to get the materials and get these ideas into course materials. And so I think we're all in the same place. And Sarah, someone was asking if students outside UIC Law School can take your course that you mentioned.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I am actually not sure. I would be open to it. I don't know what the sort of the registrar's office would allow, but for sure, I think this work calls upon interdisciplinary work. I also have had med students sort of reach out that they want to do the international human rights law concentration, and I think that would be wonderful. So I wanted to talk about awareness raising, sort of to continue answering the question. I think that toolkits, I agree, are critical. I also think that we need to think about how do we make this information accessible, not only for for us, for each other, but for the general public, right? And so I think that communities must have the information in order to use it, right? I mean, there are small businesses that might be interested. There might be communities that might use it as bargaining to sort of with developers, right? And so I think that awareness raising is important. It's important that we think about all the different constituencies of having the information and not just the experts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not sure we have other questions here that I've been trying to monitor them. We have a few minutes to wrap up here. There's lots of links here from Sarah. And okay, and then the question and answers, I don't see any additional ones at this point. Sarah, you had a comment maybe about, we were talking, the three of us were talking about the Purdue, the Purdue opioid crisis, the bankruptcy of that corporation, its payment of a penalty of, I don't know, is it $8 billion or $80 billion? And it, kind of some information that is might be going into a public corporation, benefit corporation, which is what's allowed in under the Delaware law. And Carolee, you had kind of had some interest in that too. I'm not too.
Well, yeah, well, it was really fascinating to hear about that. I mean, Purdue Pharma basically pled guilty to those charges, and so, you know, and are facing significant number of lawsuits. And so this is around, of course, the opioid crisis, right, and their role in that. And so, Sarah, I was wondering what you thought about this from your perspective on a human rights side, because I look at this and say, is there this fundamental protection that's afforded to individuals by, you know, just through their basic human rights, versus here we've been talking about setting up benefit corporations to add another layer of legal protection for stakeholders and for companies that have a specific mission to which they've committed. So your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a human rights perspective, not only does the government have a duty to hold Purdue Pharma responsible, but if it knew or should have known, right, of the opioid crisis, which it did, then it should have intervened. And, you know, as you mentioned, fundamental human rights were violated. And so the right to life is one of the most fundamental, right? And the right to health. And so I think it's very clear from a human rights perspective that the state is responsible for holding corporations and regulating and pressuring. So I see that somebody has a hand up. If Celeste, if you want to take care of that.
I see a chat, something in a chat. I think it may be from Patty, but her time being up. I don't see a hand up.
Okay.
I don't see a hand.
Cynthia Lee has her hand up.
Who?
Cynthia Lee.
Oh, okay. I didn't know we could answer any questions orally because this is a webinar. So if you can, Cynthia Lee, go ahead. I was told that was not possible.
So maybe put it in the chat.
Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, I could go into the chat.
This is Patty. I have asked the attendee to unmute, but we are now we need to shut down.
Yeah, I thought that's right. Sorry, but this was wonderful. This was wonderful. I think we learned so much from each other, and that's what the goal was of this program. So thank you. Sarah, of course, and Carolee. It's been so good to get to work with you, frankly.
Absolutely.
Someone in a business school. Thank you.
Well, good to work with you all. And if there are questions we can answer afterwards, please feel free to contact us. We'd be more than happy, I'm sure. All of us answer
email addresses for everyone are on the program. So it's really easy to get a hold of us. Okay, on to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.